We're here today to talk with Mike John. He's the director of MFA HealthTrack operations for MFA Incorporated, based here in Columbia, Missouri. Today we're going to talk to Mike about a new program called PowerCalf. Mike, PowerCalf's a multifaceted approach to herd management. It basically has 6 segments that it covers, and we want to talk about each of those today. But before we do, tell me what's going on in the beef industry today that makes a program like PowerCalf helpful to producers.
Well, what we've found in doing HealthTrack for 16 years, and we've got a lot of data that we've collected from birth to basically marketing of calves, we found out that there wasn't a lot of access to whole herd management type processes. We also discovered that we were observing a lot of best management practices, or a lot of management practices, some that worked, some that didn't work so well. And so we've had a lot of exposure to what should be working and what could work. If you add that to some of the consumer preference issues that are going on today with either traceability or sustainability or animal welfare or quality or any of those kind of things, when you build all that together, it just begs for somebody to start accumulating the information on a whole herd basis that can help people manage their cows as well as their calves, make science-based decisions, help manage the process, help reduce the things that are costing too much and increase the things that are adding to profitability. And really, when we started doing an analysis on this, it didn't really take that much more data or that much more information to move from just calf management into whole herd management. And with the technology that's coming down the pike and some of the new things that we've got access to, it just makes all of that easier. So the timing is right now to really build a way to not only help people manage their data, but then to use that ability to do it on a whole enterprise basis, or in our case, a whole company-wide basis, so that we can also benchmark those results so that you know where you stand against your peers.
Okay. And the program's kind of segmented into 6 separate areas: the data collection, data management, genetics, forage management, HealthTrack, and then kind of a cow herd best management practices grouping. Now, you've just mentioned data, and farmers have always collected data on their calves and their cows and calving records and things like that. But let's talk about what's different in PowerCalf about data collection.
Well, data collection is great, and I've known producers for most of my life that keep complete and detailed records on every animal, all the events that occur in that. They've always been, for the most part, they've been handwritten records, and whatever their record-keeping technique is, whether it's a red book or a notebook or individual note cards or calendars. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do that. The problem is you can collect all of that detail, but if you don't put it somewhere where you can sort and analyze and index and calculate like you can in a computer, like if that information is digitized, it's really, really hard to use that information to make any decisions based on that information. So to us, data collection is not just collecting the real-time data or the events that only happen once, for example, calving. I mean, if you don't get it that day, you're probably not going to get it. When you're weighing cattle, if you don't record that weight, you're not going to get it. So there's some real-time events that are critical data points in any of the analysis or indexing or benchmarking projects that we can do. But if you add to that some technologies that we have access to, whether it's chute-side reading devices or whether it's chute-side scales, electronic ID wands, and now we have a new technology that we can load on your cell phone basically and collect real-time data. So the key is not just collecting the data, it's getting it digitized. And once we get it entered into the computer, and which is what we've been doing every day for 16 years with calf data, once we get that information digitized, then we can do a lot of things with it.
So if I'm a farmer who's accustomed to keeping that in my breast pocket on a notebook, you're going to help me? How are you going to help me with that?
Well, I can do one of 2 things. I can replace that with some kind of technology like a smartphone app, or I can take the information that you've collected and you can send it to me, and whether you do that with a copy machine or a cell phone texted picture or whatever technique you want to use, we can either hand enter that data or we can replace that data entry with some type of new technology that digitizes that information immediately. And either way will get us the information in the same format. It's just a difference in how that data is collected.
So then what are we going to do with it once we have it? The data management component of this program, what all does that involve?
I've been a database manager now for 16 years, and I didn't know anything about it when I started. But I can tell you that there's some terms that database people use, like normalized data, which means that there is a very strict process for structuring your data to make sure that it is sortable and buildable and scalable and all those kind of things. So you have to make sure you design your database correctly. And the other good thing about databases is that information is permanent and it's there forever. And then you can, with the power of computer logic, then you can assign queries or build reports or do sorts or indexes or calculations or any kind of analysis that you want to do with that data. Once it's in the tables in the database, then you can build and structure any kind of customized or standardized report, do any benchmarking. I mean, it's just a matter of making sure that you have the data points that you need, and you don't need to duplicate that data, and you don't need too much data, and you need to be able to standardize that data so that everybody's result is comparable.
And I think that brings me to the next, a couple questions really. So I have all this data in a database full of other people's data. What kind of benchmarking, what kind of reports and details do I get back that help me as a cattleman figure out what I'm doing good, what I'm not doing so well, and then secondly, after that, how do I know that's my information is confidential?
Well, if we couldn't keep the information confidential, then I think we'd be in real trouble. I mean, I've known beef producers. I've been one my whole life, and they're pretty private people, pretty independent people, and you know, just if you don't believe me, just go around and ask all these guys how many cows they own.
I've done that. Yeah.
It is important that it's confidential, but it's also important that collectively and cumulatively we can build those data sets so that for something as simple as conception rates or the calving distribution, some of those kind of reports, that data is collected in the same way in the same time, and that it is standardized in the tables so that we compare, for example, your conception rates against the whole group, or maybe even a subset of that group that's in your region or your zip code or whatever we want to do. Then we can compare those things accurately. And so I guess from the start, I believe that every producer has probably a pretty good idea of the kind of analysis they want. I also know that people that haven't been doing computer-based analyses, once they start seeing that, it kind of opens their mind. Well, if I can see it this way, can I also see it this way, or can I do this way? So I know we're going to do a lot of custom reporting, and I know a lot of people would shy away from that, thinking it's more work. But once we get that data digitized, it doesn't take but just a couple of seconds to sort it by this column or sort it by this column, or create a formula that we can copy to a bunch of different columns. I mean, it's once we get the data in the database, doing the reporting is simple. Mm-hmm. And I also do want to make sure that we do some standard analyses and benchmarking that the industry recognizes, like calving rates and conception rates and weaning rates, pounds weaned per cow exposed. Those are ratios that the industry uses to benchmark production. So if we go through this process with you and your results are below where the standard is or where you'd like to be, we're very familiar with the different strategies and practices that you could engage in to move yourself either up to that average or above it. So the old adage that you can't manage what you can't measure is so true. And our goal primarily is to get the data standardized and to get it digitized. And once we do those things, then from the data management component of PowerCalf, we can do anything you want.
So that kind of data being standardized fits into a kind of a new area for a lot of people. But now let's talk about genetics. Now, genetics is an area that has existing databases out in the world that people are familiar with. What does PowerCalf do with the genetic component?
Well, now that we can identify individual genetics, and what I say by that, I mean, we've always had AI and we've always had bull EPDs. They're not always, but I mean, for certainly in the recent history. And so there's been ways to kind of pull a genetic component into that process. But if they're not included in a standardized database where you can compare health and growth and birth weights and those kind of things, then sometimes those things don't have meaning. And it's also been pretty hard to identify individual sires. So you know that you've got 100 cows in this pasture and you got 3 bulls turned out there with them. You might have 3 of the best bulls that walk out there, but you have literally no idea which bull was the sire of which calf. Well, there is technology that's becoming more and more accurate every year for either a DNA analysis on some of those characteristics or a DNA analysis that identifies parentage, that can literally identify which bull sired which calf. And so now we can start pinpointing and fine-tuning some of those things. So regardless of whether you use AI with some proven EPDs or whether you're using natural service bulls, we can literally then pull all of that information into the standardized database and sort the results by those sires or by those cows and start making some really informed management decisions on how we should move forward to improve those numbers.
Maybe I don't want any of those bulls.
Maybe I don't want those bulls, or maybe the bull I paid the most money for didn't sire any calves. Maybe there's something wrong with him. I mean, we've never really known that before. The management strategy for multiple bull pastures before has always been, well, something might happen to one of them, so we better have an extra one out there.
Right.
And that's okay, but bulls, natural service bulls, at least good ones, registered ones right now, are running from 3,500 to 15,000. So it's not an insignificant investment.
It's a real investment. Now, PowerCalf also, it's a wide-ranging, wide breadth management of a herd. It includes forage management as one of its components. What do we know about forage management from this program that's going to help us?
Well, to me, it's been a very eye-opening experience to start to spread our scope out into forage, because the fortunate thing about MFA being a complete line supplier of ag inputs is that we have people that are absolute experts on forage management, whether it's the type of seed genetics or fertilization or weed control, all that kind of. Those people exist in this company. Now we don't tend to walk around with them, and we don't office in the same place because we are in different departments. But that expertise resides here in MFA. So when we started combining some of those efforts and having producer meetings where we had a forage management expert and a livestock either management or marketing expert talk about those issues, it soon became apparent that forage management is such a critical piece of any livestock, especially any ruminant operation, that we have to include that in here. And there's some very simple steps involved in forage management. It's not that difficult to identify what those steps are. Sometimes it's hard or expensive to implement those, but you get the soil pH right, then any fertilization that you do soil tests. We even do grid sampling now on pastures to make sure that we're putting that fertilizer in the right spot. And then when you add weed control on top of that, then you're maximizing your highest investment is your land. So if you can maximize the production out of that with adequate and detailed and scientific forage management, you're taking a huge step to improving your profitability. And it's been here all the time. We just didn't include it in these livestock management programs until now.
How hard is it for you, Mike John, the cattle producer, to spend that money on your pasture that you might not have spent before? Weed control, fertility.
It's getting easier. And when I say that, I mean, traditionally, you look at my granddad was a VOAG teacher, and in his day was considered, pretty progressive as far as the things that he did. And yet they didn't follow a lot of fertilization, and his idea of managing pastures correctly was to make sure he had hogs and chickens and sheep and cattle all in the same pasture, so they could all utilize either different forages or different byproducts of those animals. And so that was kind of the technique in the past. And it is an investment that you have to try first, and it's a long-term investment. And the thing that opened my eyes, I think the fastest was a suggestion on a certain type. We were having some thistle problems and some winter annual problems, and the suggestion was to use a herbicide in December. And I would have never thought about using a herbicide in December, and the result of that was amazing at how much, and you could tell that in the spring by how many huge bare spots that you had that obviously didn't have any grass in them. They were eaten up by weeds. So if you can see something like that in effect, then you can pretty soon realize that that minimal investment in herbicide is going to open up a lot more ground for grass, and the more grass I have, the more cattle I can run, and the more cattle I can run, the more pounds I create per acre, and pretty soon you just put a dollar figure to that, and the investment is not near as scary.
That makes a lot of sense. You're kind of talking about fine-tuning your forage base. Another segment of PowerCalf is just best management practices for the cow herd itself, which is another way of fine-tuning something, if that makes any sense. Talk about the immunity practices and the nutrition components of PowerCalf.
Well, we have obviously seen a lot of different techniques, and when you start doing some of this benchmarking, you realize that there are people that have conception rate issues, or they have calving interval issues where they have a high number of calves born toward the end of the calving period instead of the beginning of the calving period. And so when you start taking advantage of all of the science that's out there to approach those, and then also having access to herds where those things are really good, then now you can start answering questions of people. Well, I wonder why his conception rate's so much better than mine. Well, it might be that they're on a better mineral program, or they're on a higher plane of nutrition, or their body condition score was higher at breeding, or that their immunity program was a lot better. I mean, to me, the best example I can give people on a best management practice is cow vaccination. We've learned that these cow-calf producers that will give a modified live viral vaccine to cows 30 days pre-breeding, it literally matches the protection against the maximum risk. So if you look at the risk for the things that we vaccinate against, they tend to peak about 100 days into the breeding season. Well, if you give that vaccination 30 days pre-breeding, then the immunity peaks at about the same time. So it not only provides protection against those things that can lower your conception rate, like early term abortions or some of the venereal diseases or some of those things. It also protects against persistently infected PVDs on calves. It also allows you to use a modified live vaccine on calves pre-weaning. And now you're kind of getting into our sweet spot. We've been collecting health data on calves in the HealthTrack program for all these years. And we know that if you really want to reduce the incidence of disease post-weaning, you give 2 rounds of modified live virals to those calves pre-weaning. So if you vaccinate the cow, you're going to improve all of her characteristics and her conception and her colostrum and all those things that where she passes on immunity to the calves. And then you get 2 rounds of a modified live shot, which you can do since you've exposed the cow to modified live. Now we know that we're almost eliminating the chance of those calves getting sick post-weaning.
That lends its entry into the 6th component of PowerCalf, is the HealthTrack program.
We have the most experience, obviously, with HealthTrack. We've had close to 570,000 calves in the program.
This is where you cut your teeth on this data crunching and finding out what works and what doesn't.
Exactly.
Talk about just briefly about that protocol and what it gets you in the marketplace.
Well, it didn't take long for the researchers at Texas A&M, and I don't even know what year it started. It's been long enough ago. But they soon realized what they were trying to do was identify a preconditioning program that would actually create value all the way through the production chain. And so what they did was that they tried different vaccination protocols, different nutrition protocols, timing, weaning protocols, and then they would follow those calves all the way through the feeding phase. And that's basically where they came up with the VAC45 processing, which is 2 rounds of vaccinations, weaned a minimum of 45 days. That's basically the underpinning of HealthTrack. And they found out that what that did was that caused for a lot higher percentage choice, a lot better performance, a lot fewer pulls in the feed yard. Every single one of those things has a definable value.
And you've seen that as a proven value on the sale barn floor for buyers taking those cattle out west.
Absolutely. I mean, and they're in certain weight ranges at certain times of the year, and in certain markets, that difference can be enormous, and different parts of the cattle cycle. I know sometimes it's hard to see that process at any given sale on any given day, because there's at least a $25 or $30 a hundredweight spread just on quality of cattle that has nothing to do with their processing level. So if you try to see a $5 or $10 or $15 a hundredweight premium in the middle of that, it's very, very difficult to do, because there are other things that drive calf value. But what we've seen and the data collection that we've done is it's not just the premium they get in the marketplace for that, it's the fact that they're identified and traceable back to the origin. So that's important to buyers of those cattle. We can provide them with key dates like weaning dates and first birth dates. We can provide the downstream buyer information on how they were vaccinated, when they were vaccinated, whether they were implanted or not. All those things have value. And at the end of the day, to the cow-calf producer, if he weans those calves for 45 days and keeps them healthy during that process and puts cost-effective weight gain on those calves, he literally can pay for that process even without a premium, because he's eliminating his sale day shrink and he's adding cost-effective gain to those calves.
Will PowerCalf as a program bring these kinds of known benefits to buyers, even if it's breeding stock buyers?
Oh, I think absolutely. I mean, I get inquiries all the time from every segment of the industry, whether it's from the seed stock segment or the backgrounding stocker segment or the feed yard segment. Even the food service and retail companies are starting to want to know more about where this came from. Where did this steak come from? Why is this steak better than this steak? My customers say they want to know where their food came from. I mean, all of these things are starting to come to the forefront. And when the technology starts allowing that process to happen, which it's getting very close to doing, then you're going to see even a broader spread in documented and known and understood processes in cattle, and those that have absolutely no data on them.
How do I start being a part of PowerCalf if I'm a beef producer?
The best thing to do is either go to your agri-service center and tell them you're interested, or if you happen to know the livestock sales rep from MFA, then contact them. That's the best way. You can certainly call in here and ask for me. And we just recently hired a livestock data specialist that's been working with a lot of producers to accumulate not only this year's data, but to bring in some previous year's data so that they can kind of put some trend lines together on how their operations are running.
What's it cost me to start?
Nothing.
Nothing. And do I have to do all those components we just talked about?
The cool part about PowerCalf is that it is an accumulation of the things that we've learned, and it is also an offering of the services that we can provide that really I don't think are available anywhere else in our market area. So if we put this tool chest together of offerings, to me it's up to the producer to pick and choose which one he's interested in. Now obviously HealthTrack has some very specific protocol requirements that have to be met in order to get that HealthTrack tag. But PowerCalf it's just a pick and choose type process. These are the services that we can provide. If you're interested in them, we will provide them.
Well, that runs through most of the questions I had for the day. Is there anything that I've left out that you want to tell us about PowerCalf?
Well, I think that a lot of producers that we deal with may have the expertise and understand computers well enough to enter that and digitize their own data. But some of the software programs that are available right now are complicated and they're time consuming, and I know a lot of producers would much rather be spending time at their kids' sporting events or doing some of those things at night than sitting in front of their computers entering this data. And also, a lot of the decisions that you make in a cow-calf operation are pretty timely. And so if you wait till the end of that process to enter that data to get the analysis, you've probably already swept by those dates. So we feel like providing the opportunity to get that data digitized when it happens, as it happens, and then provide you with the tools to make some better management decisions because of that has a tremendous amount of value. And I know that with the producers I've talked to, there's an awful lot of them that even though they've been digitizing their records, the thought of having somebody else that would do that for them is pretty appealing to them. So that's kind of the overall thought process we have on this, is that let's continue to do what we've been doing. Let's broaden it out just a little bit farther from the calf data into the whole herd data and see where this thing goes. And I think it's going to be very successful.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank Mike John for being with us today. I'm Steve Fairchild, editor of today's Farmer Magazine, part of MFA Incorporated. We've been talking about PowerCalf.